Everybody, and welcome to PopStream, the official streaming show from your friendly neighborhood nerds at Pop Culture Classroom. I'm one of your hosts, Matt Slater. I am the Education Program Manager here at PCC. You can find me at Maddie Slay on Twitter, which I highly encourage all of you to do. And you have found yourself watching the PopStream Learning Lounge, our show especially for educators and librarians and parents, where we explore the educational applications of the pop culture that we all love. It's your community talking about your media because this is your pop stream. Tonight, we're talking about video games in the classroom. And I don't mean edutainment when I mean that. So we're not talking Math Blaster or Reader Rabbit. We're talking about capital V video games, just like the ones that many of us and the young people around us are already playing. We've got an amazing interview with Zack Hartzman, who's a high school social studies and EL teacher based out of New York City. And he is the creator of Hey Listen Games, which is a website dedicated to gaming in the classroom with lesson plans that are ready to go. And if you know what it's like to be a teacher, you know how much of a help that can be when you're trying to implement something new into your classroom. And after the interview, we'll be playing a game live here on the show and highlighting the Hey Listen lesson plan that goes with it. And I don't want to give too much away, but if you ever spent any time on AOL Instant Messenger back in the day, be prepared to be smacked in the face with nostalgia. It's going to be a good time. For every episode of PopStream, I'm joined by Pop Culture Classroom's Programming and Partnerships Manager, Dr. Tajan Campbell. How are you this evening?
I am doing well, Matt. I'm excited to talk about video games. I'm not the best at playing video games. I have terrible hand-eye coordination, but I am definitely the most enthusiastic. I have a very good time. So I'm excited to dive in.
Do you have an all-time favorite to either watch or to play?
That's a hard question. I grew up watching my brother play a lot of video games, and I think for me as an adult, what really made me a video game player as opposed to just a watcher is Zelda. I played The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild on my Switch, and it changed me. Just the adventure, I've now played it through twice. It is an unbelievably fantastic game that is now a happy place for me to just go and enjoy the breadth of that world because it's so much fun.
This is why we get along so well together. And tonight, filling our rotating seat is professional artist, PCC instructor, and gaming enthusiast Dion Harris. How are you this evening?
Hello, hello. I'm doing very well this evening. Thank you for asking, Matt.
Excellent. And apologies to our audience. I think we are on a little bit of delay on our call. But Dion, what is your favorite video game of all time?
That's a tough one for me too. I grew up playing like Final Fantasy and Street Fighter, so those will always have like a special place in my heart. But I think my current favorite game has to be the Portal series.
Ooh, that's a good one.
Yeah.
That one's a lot of fun.
Oh,
Yeah.
nice. Yeah.
I haven't started Portal
Um,
Reloaded yet.
oh my God. And the co-op in two is just
Oh
so much
yeah, I
fun.
know. Yeah, I love the Portal series so much.
Wait, Reloaded?
Yeah, apparently there's like a third installation in the series. I'm not sure if it's canon yet or not, but it was just released like I want to say like this month or last
Oh
month, so
wow,
pretty recently. Yeah,
that's exciting.
yeah,
I am going to have to go look this
yeah.
up.
Check it out.
Yeah.
And Matt and I are like both taking mental
Well, do
notes.
y'all have memories of playing? Right? Do y'all have any memories of playing video games in the classroom when you were students?
Oh yeah, Oregon Trail. Oregon Trail was the video game that we were playing when I was in school. I think the only other game was I can't even remember the name of it, but you used to like program this little like carrot to like do little like designs and stuff on the screen. And I guess it was kind of like to introduce us to
I don't. Yeah,
programming.
I don't
Yeah, I
remember.
can't even remember the name of it, but yeah,
Huh?
Oregon Trail and that were the only two games that we had about around that time.
I don't remember much of playing video games in the classroom, but
Asian, did you play anything?
I do remember my Jumpstart game. So that was a huge thing in my family at the beginning of every school year to go and get the Jumpstart game that corresponded with that grade. And it was always
Yes.
my parents were really smart. It was always like a big deal to go get your new game, and you had game time to play your game. It was really fun, and I can still think back to really fond memories I had of working through Jumpstart. And then when my brother would get one, he was several grades behind me. When he would get a game, I would want to play it too, just to go through the adventures. So I have fond memories of those Jumpstarts, and they came in the box. It was so much fun.
Nice.
I specifically remember Jumpstart third grade. And even when I was in like fourth grade and fifth grade, I liked the third grade one best. And so I would just keep playing that one over and over again. But in the classroom, I remember playing Zoombinis a lot. Zoombinis was a great one. And that's that. And like Beacon teaches typing because they would gamify like how to learn how to type. I played a lot of that back in the classroom. But before we really dive into tonight's topic of video games in the classroom and moving beyond the edutainment games that we all played when we were younger, let me give you the rundown of PopStream just in case you're new here. And if you are new here, a very special welcome to you. Thanks for dropping by. PopStream airs every other Thursday with 2 different shows each month. Our first show of the month is simply called PopStream, and that's where we'll be diving deep into topics of all kinds of pop culture fans with guest authors, creators, and folk that can really give us a unique perspective on the media that we all love. So this show covers comics, graphic novels, manga, anime, film, and TV, and gaming. So no matter what brand of nerd you are, we've got something for you. This month, we talked to author and front person of the band War on Women, Shauna Potter, about toxic fandoms and how we can make sure we're making our fan space as inclusive as possible. So if you missed that, you can find that episode on our YouTube page and on podcast services. Then the second show of the month, which is the one that you are watching right now or listening to, is a brand new show for this season called the PopStream Learning Lounge. This show is designed specifically for educators, librarians, and parents because we'll be talking about specific ways to unlock the learning potential of pop culture in classrooms and other educational settings. We'll have guest educators and experts, our rotating cast, and we'll be talking lesson plans and sharing funny stories and incorporating the audience and demonstrations of exactly how pop culture properties can be used in educational settings. Last month, we got to talk to National Teacher of the Year, Tabitha Rossprey, about social emotional learning with pop culture, and we even played a rousing game of Know You Evil, which was a tabletop RPG designed for 5 to 10-year-olds. Tajan, that was a good time, yeah?
It was so much fun, and I was really nervous going into it because I have not played those types of games before, and I was thinking, oh my goodness, we're going to be playing this game that's geared towards children, and I'm not going to be able to keep up. And instead, it was an unbelievable amount of fun, and I think just a really great demonstration of all the things that you could do with this game with kids from ages, 5 and up.
Yeah, we shot marshmallow cannons at dinosaurs. We helped robots find their missing boots. We fought pirates. It was a great time. But no matter which show you're watching, you have options because we love to give you options. So to get the premier PopStream experience, you have to join us live on Thursdays at 7 o'clock p.m. Mountain Time. Joining us live means that you get to hang out with our community and interact with the cast and the guests through our live chat. You can get your comments read live on the air, get your questions answered, and get new insights from the rest of the community in the chat as well, because y'all are some smart folk, a lot smarter than us sometimes. And if you're in the chat right now, I want to know what your favorite video game of all time is. And there are no wrong answers here. From Skyrim to Candy Crush, we don't discriminate on your gaming preferences, but let us know, what is your favorite video game of all time? But if you can't watch live, you can always catch the show on demand on YouTube and podcast services in the days after our live recording. But no matter how you enjoy PopStream, we hope that you'll give us a like, that you'll share us with your friends, and give us some great reviews. But ultimately, we thank you for being here. All right, so tonight's topic, video games in the classroom. Earlier this week, Tajan and I had the opportunity to sit down with our guest, Zack Hartzman, creator of Hey Listen Games. We're going to be playing that interview right now. The 3 of us will be off screen since it is pre-recorded, but we will all still be in the chat. So we encourage you, the live audience, to still be a part of the conversation while we're playing the pre-recorded interview. Tajan, what can people expect from this interview with Zack?
Matt, I think our interview was really just more of a fantastic conversation about the power of games in the classroom. And from this conversation, our audience can really expect both a high-level look at what does it mean to bring games into the classroom, and then some really powerful practical recommendations on how do you engage with games? What if you're not a gamer but you want to bring games into the classroom? How should you approach it? What type of games are appropriate? Is there a high cost ceiling that you have to deal with? What does accessibility look like across students? It really is every conceivable angle I feel like we covered. And Zach is so fantastic at making what can be kind of an intimidating topic really accessible and engaging and regardless, and you just want to bring games in with an educational purpose, we're going to cover it in this conversation.
Excellent. I couldn't agree more. It's a really fun. But after this interview, don't forget that we'll be having a live gameplay demo highlighting one of Zach's lesson plans. So make sure you stay tuned for that. And with that, Christopher on the back end, we are ready to play the video. Zack Hartzman here with us today, one of the members of the future class of video games as determined by the Video Game Awards, and the creator of Hey Listen Games. So, Zack, tell us who you are.
Thanks. Hey, everyone. Thank you so much for having me. So I'm Zack. I'm a high school teacher in New York City, social studies teacher. I've taught a number of different areas in social studies over the years. Currently finishing up a year on U.S. history. And yeah, I'm the founder of Hey Listen Games. It's a website where I create curriculum and lesson plans around the use of video games in my classroom. Nearly everything there is stuff that I've taught with myself over the years in different capacities. And like Matt said, I was recently chosen as part of the future class for the Game Awards. It's a group of 50 people from around the world who are what's the terminology they use? People who are making the games industry more inclusive and diverse and using games in cool and unique ways.
Yeah, lots of members of like games media and the press. And then it's awesome to have you as part of that. I was so excited when I saw that on Twitter to see how they were highlighting, hey, listen, and all the work you've been putting into that.
Totally. When because it was like a nomination process, and it was actually my wife who told me she was going to submit the form nominating me for it.
Yes.
And I was like, there's no way they're going to choose me. It's going to be all like, it's going to be games people. I'm a teacher. And then they ended up choosing me, and I believe I'm the only educator in the group. It is mostly like gaming personalities or game developers, people in the industry. So I'm sort of an outsider in that regard, which is pretty cool.
That has to be so validating.
Yeah, 100%.
Well, and a great plug for education to really show the potential for education in gaming and just that crossover that a lot of people might not even be aware to make those connections.
100%. Yeah, it's awesome how like, especially it's been gaming and education has been kind of like creeping into like the public space more. It's like it happened with comics where like all of a sudden comics and graphic novels and manga were just like in school libraries. Like it was not there, and then it just like exploded. And that's starting to happen more with games. You're starting to see a lot more teachers take gaming seriously, which is just awesome to see.
Yeah, it's kind of about where comics and graphic novels were like 10 years ago, right?
Mhm.
Where they were having the conversations of, is this legitimate? Is this something we can really use in the classroom? How do we get it in there? And now so many teachers are like, that is a staple part of my classroom. And we've seen things like, Zoom beanies in the classroom and the Oregon Trail in the classroom for years. But what you're doing is you're taking established game properties, right? Indie games, popular games that kids are familiar with, and figuring out how to unlock the educational potential in those, which I think is awesome. And that's what we're trying to do here at Pop Culture Classroom as well. And it's so exciting to see people like you also kind of on the forefront of this conversation, that, we can all kind of jump into this conversation and really push this in education together.
Yeah, definitely. It's a big distinction. I don't use educational video games really. Like I played Oregon Trail and Math Blaster. And hell, my parents my parents had me playing Reader Rabbit when I was a kid. But like this is not that. It's games that we're already kind of playing for fun. And I'm just like, same thing with the ways that teachers have incorporated film or TV or just like the stuff that we're already engrossed in. Let's just find ways to bring that in.
Speaking of things that we're already engrossed in, let's take just a quick stop before we dive into more about Hey Listen Games. And Zach, can you tell us a little bit about your nerddom? What are your fandoms? What types of mediums are you into? In addition to gaming, where do you hang your nerd hat at?
In a couple of different places. So obviously gaming, I've been playing games nearly my entire life. It became a major aspect of my life more during the N64 era. It was really Ocarina of Time and Mario 64 that like it became a part of my life rather than just like a small hobby that I kind of did on the side. And other parts, I grew up reading comics, right? My like promo image everywhere is just me cosplaying as Clark Kent still. I probably need to choose a new profile picture because that's now like 5 years old.
We would have never known if you didn't tell us. Come on.
So I probably need to find a new image of me at some point to start using. But yeah, I've been reading Superman comics forever. I'm still devastated that we haven't had like a more Superman in film and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Especially I want a sequel to Man of Steel. We're never gonna get that. But definitely animation also. It's like fandoms. I'm like deeply into like Avatar: The Last Airbender, Legend of Korra, and I'm super excited that there's a whole new like Avatar studios that was created going forward. That'll be on Paramount Plus. I'm super excited about that. But yeah, anything superhero related, the MCU, all of that, Star Wars, I'm everywhere.
You have your fingers in all of it. I can relate. I feel like I dabble in all things, but games are like, that's my expertise. That is where I could write the dissertations and, carry the conversation for forever. So with Hey Listen Games, obviously you have all this fandom in all these different places, but what inspired you to create this website and this repository of lesson plans for educators where they can find these things for free?
Yeah, so when I started teaching, when I was in grad school, one of my professors dedicated a couple of days to using comics and film. He would show us different ways to use different mediums like comics and film, or how to create activities around those. And I thought it was awesome. So immediately my first year, I was already using comics, TV, and film in my at the time global history class. And in my second year, I also wanted to include some video games. And I was thinking, like, in grad school, they never mentioned it, right? Even though comics and film and TV was at the forefront of a lot of those conversations. And I started looking online for different ideas. And there were teachers, like veteran teachers, who have used different games in different ways, but it was always suggestions. Like, I use this game, this is what I did, here's a cool game that might be fun to use in your class, but there was never a lesson plan. And whenever I went to my principal with like a different, I'll say, like, idea, she was and she's super accepting. She pretty much lets me try anything I want, which is awesome. But she would always say, okay, just show me lesson plans, show me the standards, what are the outcomes, what are the essential questions, right? To make sure that I'm just actually thinking it through before I just like come and play a game with them.
And then you got to do the work.
Right. So, but for comics and stuff or movies, you can find pre-made, like tons of pre-made activities already online. Like lots of people have already done that, and I couldn't find anything for games. So I just had to start making my own over the years. And as I was talking with other people in person, like especially at like PAX conventions or online, a lot of other educators who I bumped to were super interested in the idea and like have wanted to find ways to bring games into their classrooms. But they didn't know where to start, and it was like they were at the step I was years ago. So, and when was it? 2018, 2019? 2019, I decided to just take the lesson plans I had at the time and just publish them online. Just to start, I was just sharing with them, like just sharing them with everyone, just because it had been asked of me. Instead of just like giving another person a Google Doc, like making a copy of a Google Doc, is like I'm just gonna put it all out there. And immediately, like I got tons and tons of positive feedback. And so just over time, it's now like all my curriculum is there for different activities, for different like lesson plans, unit plans I've done, and it's kind of grown into it's also a personal blog where I'll blog about my experiences teaching games with my students, or whenever I put up a new lesson, I'll provide my rationale for why I chose this game, or how I've used it, or how I plan on using it. Because I haven't used every single lesson there yet. A lot of it is like me thinking towards the future. I'm just going to make it now and then teach it with it later. And it's just been like almost no pushback from any teachers. And we'll get into like the nitty gritty, like around like accessibility and affordability. But like as a thing to do, everyone's just been really excited about it.
Well, having that lesson plan there is huge, because if you're unfamiliar with like teaching practice or what it's like to teach in schools, it's totally one thing to have the idea, right? Then it's another thing to figure out the logistics of, now how is that idea going to work with 20, 30 students? And then it's a whole nother thing to say, how do I fill in this lesson plan? Because depending on the environment where you teach, you might have some really strict and robust requirements for how to actually write up your lesson plan and all the things that need to be on there. So for you, and I've seen your lesson plans and they are beautiful, first of all, but to have that ready to be able to show an administrator just takes away so much of that barrier of what a teacher might need to do to implement these ideas. And having the resource of your website to go to, just like people can go to for film ideas or graphic novel ideas, in my opinion, does a lot to really legitimize using video games as a learning tool to just say, no, go check out these lesson plans, go see how it's standard aligned, and then, let's talk about how we can get that into my classroom.
Right.
In looking, Zach, at video games, you talked a little bit about this when you talked about your nerddoms, but what is really your history with games? How long have you been playing? What are some of your favorites? What was kind of what were your gateway games into getting into the realm of video gaming and education?
So gateway games into gaming, the first one I can recall is the original Super Mario Brothers cartridge combined with Duck Hunt. I still have it on one of my. It's up there somewhere.
You got to have the
Um,
CRT TV set up for that one.
Yeah, we had a massive CRT TV in the basement. It was great. It was a holiday present that my uncle had given me when the Super Nintendo came out. So I actually skipped the Super Nintendo generation because my uncle gave me his hand-me-down while he got the new console,
There
which
you
is
go.
fine. I've now have a Super Nintendo when I've gone back and played those games, but it was the original Mario and Duck Hunt, really. And then on that console is mostly the Mario games and a couple of other, like Blades of Steel was a fun hockey game that my brother and I would play constantly. But it was really, like I said, the N64 is like what transitioned me into like wanting to like get into games. Like it,
Mhm.
It did that to
more
a
so-
lot of us.
yeah, it
Yeah.
wasn't just like
Yeah, that
on
was the
the
console.
NES. It was more like Mario was fun to play, but then when I got to like Ocarina of Time and Super Mario 64, it's like, oh, I'm going on an adventure. It was different, right? Because I didn't play the Zelda games that came before that. Ocarina of Time was my
Mhm.
first one. I've gone back and played them, but that was the first one, and it's like it changed my perception of what gaming can be. And it was
I
cool.
love all
talk
the
about-
memes that say, like, you know, once you've played Ocarina of Time, like, I wish someone told me that no game would ever be this good ever again, right? That's definitely the
Yep.
feeling that it had, especially as a kid.
Yeah. I mean, I was 7 when that game came out, so it was
Mhm.
just like it was mind-boggling. It was mind-boggling to my dad, who would watch us play it. And that game in particular, because the internet was still sort of in its infancy when it came out. Like there was the game facts, like was sort of a thing, but we couldn't like my brother and I couldn't just go online and figure out what to do. We had to like go to school the next day and go to the cafeteria and ask our friends like, "What did you do?" Like, and it was a whole new social experience when it came to that game, which like kids are still doing in different ways with games today. Right? They're coming to school, they're talking about games in our class or in the cafeteria.
Mhm.
It's usually now it seems to be more like online games that they're talking about, but it's that's that was like my gateway into gaming. My gateway into gaming and education was when my teacher had us play Oregon Trail in elementary school.
There you go. Yeah. So,
That got a lot of us. So many people died on the Oregon Trail.
Yeah.
So many.
mentioning, you know, how, because I think we're about the same age. Ocarina of Time came out when I was 6, I believe, 7, somewhere in there. And you teach teens, and gaming looks very different, but especially the type of games that teens are into. You know, I was playing GameCube at the time and Wind Waker, and, you know, very solitary in my gaming experience. But now with the new consoles and internet access, and you can go on, tablet and phone gaming looks very different for teens, a lot of teens, than it might have for us. What are some of the things working with teens that you've noticed and some of those changes?
So it's interesting. So I work with teens, but my school is an interesting one that it's an international transfer school. So my student population is a 100% immigrant population moving
Wow.
to New York and starting high school over, regardless of what grade they were in back home. So like when I did teach 9th and 10th grade, I would have students who were seniors back home come back here and start over in 9th grade because they needed to learn
Mm.
English in order to pass the standardized tests in order to graduate. So like I remember my first year teaching, I was 23 and I had a 22-year-old in my class.
Wow.
Right? She was like, that's just kind of the population we were dealing with. So like I teach teens, but I'm also teaching adults quite
Okay.
often.
Yeah.
But yeah, so they're mostly the ones who play games are usually playing Fortnite, Call of Duty, Apex, like that genre of online shooters. Then some of them will get hyped whenever a new like big Sony or Nintendo exclusive drops. Like I know a lot of them were really excited about Ghost of Tsushima last year. Like for that,
Yeah.
like that game in particular, they were just like obsessed with. And I've got a lot of anime nerds, so I think that it's because it was in Japan. Like a lot of them were just like, I want to play this game.
Might be part of it. Yeah.
Yeah, but it's definitely like they play more mature quote unquote games. Like they want the violent games, and a lot of the games that I play with them are not like that at all. And I'm kind of introducing them into new genres as I do this.
I love that. I like to consider myself a video game evangelist. I'm always like, this game, it's literature, and I don't care if you play video games or not. You need to play this game, like Kentucky Route Zero, and, you know, some of those. So I love that you're able to introduce them to games outside of, you know, online shooters, which are great and absolutely have their place. But, you know, kind of expanding the palette.
Yeah, like one of my favorite games that I've taught with a number of times is Gone Home. and what remains of Edith Finch. I usually teach them together, and all my students, like all my gaming students, were just like, "Yeah, I never played a game like that where you just walk around and just like pick stuff up." It's like they're usually
and read,
in these big action games. Yeah.
definitely something different.
I think for me, one of the things that when we were preparing for our talk today, I was thinking about educational games, and what came to mind were the educational games that I played as a kid. And that game that my family would go get at the beginning of every school year that was for your grade level, and it would be about math and reading and like
Jumpstart? Did you play Jumpstart?
Oh, Jumpstart every year.
Yes.
It was a big day that we would go and get it, and I loved them, and I would play them over, and they were really fun games. But what we're talking about here is very different, and that's exciting. Yeah. But I'm curious, what are the benefits that you point to when looking at, this type of gaming for education as a teaching tool? What do you tell people is, these are the benefits. This is why we need to be introducing these mediums into the classroom.
Yeah. So like going off of educational video games, they can have their place. I've found educational games are more fun when you let students do it on their own time and not like force it down their throat, because they don't want to be tricked, right? But the thing with entertainment games that we're already playing is that they deal with intrinsic motivation, where like the reward is playing it, you're having fun while you're doing it, whereas educational games are often, I'm going to like stutter as I say it, extrinsically motivated. And where it's like the gameplay isn't always fun, the reward is like what you get at the end of it, which doesn't work for everyone. Whereas if you're having like, and this is why you hear a lot of people like, this is why gamification is also it's becoming bigger, where people are trying to gamify learning environments because they want the like learning process itself to be intrinsically motivated, right? And games are a very good example of that, where you're having fun while you're doing it and you're learning along the way. So I advocate for entertainment games because they are that, and they already hold so much educational value if you just look at it in a different way, right? You can have fun with it, but it's also giving you ample time to like analyze what you're doing.
You have the privilege of teaching with high school kids and kind of like dissecting a lot of like themes within games and kind of the concepts that they talk about. One thing that we always say, especially for younger gamers, when we have parents come to us that say, I have a struggling reader or something like that, is hand them a video game without voiceover, right? Because that intrinsic motivation that you're talking about, struggling readers, and we talked about this on a previous podcast, I think, if you give them something that they struggle with and they don't have a real motivation to push through that struggle, then there's no reason for them to get better, right? To push through the struggle and grapple and get better. Whereas if you say, here's Pokemon, the only way to get better or the only way to win is to read what's on the word, then they have that incentive to grapple with what they're reading, to try and comprehend and, go a little bit further in their grappling than they might if it was just a prose book that maybe they don't have any interest in. Yeah. So I love that intrinsic motivation part about the games that we all already love.
Yeah. It's funny you say that, because I just yesterday tweeted that I'm currently playing through the Mass Effect games for the first time with the Legendary Edition. I just tweeted yesterday that Mass Effect is really just one big trick to get me to read more, because there's just tons and tons, and a lot of games now do this, where like, yes, there's all the dialogue options and all of that, but like every single thing you touch is like, oh, it adds a codex entry. Let me go read this. Let me go travel to this planet. You don't actually travel to the planet. You just read about the planet, right? There's just tons of planets where you go to them, and then it just says like survey, and that's it. Right? You're not actually like physically putting your character there. It's just like, oh, here's a blurb about this planet. I'm reading all of this information that like I'm not playing, quote unquote, I'm just reading constantly in this game. And it was like that growing up, right? It was like that with Pokemon. It was like that with Ocarina of Time and Zelda, where like historically does not have voiceover until Breath of the Wild, and it's just all just constant reading of dialogue.
Yeah, I was one of those nerds that when Doom Eternal came out, people complained because the action of the game would stop so that you could get all the lore just by reading, and that's how you got the lore. And I was like, I like this. I like taking my shooting break and like reading into all this lore.
I thought the same thing with Skyrim. I liked reading all of like the random stories in Skyrim that you could find in these books, that someone had taken the time to write stories for each book that you picked up, and I enjoyed it.
That's actually the death of me, because anytime I start a game like that, I'm like, I'm going to read every book that I pick up. And then because of that, I never end up finishing the game. But I want to know it all. Um, Zach, when you are thinking about games that you want to write lesson plans for, that you want to introduce into your classroom, is there a specific type of game that you usually gravitate towards, or does it kind of run the gamut?
So usually, I'd say like 95% of the games are indie games. So
Mm.
they're shorter, like 3 to 5 hours is usually like what I'm aiming at. Just because it's hard to use a game that's longer. Just like I don't have the class time available to sit down and play a 10 to 20 to 30 hour game. It's not
No,
it's
yeah.
it's not feasible. And then larger games are also harder. And this is why developers need to hire more educators, because the games themselves are not like it's not intuitive. You can't just like if I want to. Everyone says Assassin's Creed, right? But if I want to teach about this specific moment in Assassin's Creed, it's like, okay, I need to play up until that moment. I need to create a separate save file that I make sure I don't delete in order to just have that lesson ready. And that's just too big of an ask to like tell teachers like, okay, just play this game, get up to that point, create a save file. It's too much.
Not
Whereas,
to mention, if they're not used to playing games, that's like
yeah,
just asking someone to jump into a huge, 60, 80 hour RPG
right.
seems difficult.
So like in a game like I had mentioned my students were really into Ghost of Tsushima when it came out, and I wanted to find a way to bring that in, and specifically I wanted to use the haiku feature in the game,
Mm.
where the game lets you write has a system of creating haikus, poems, and they're beautiful and it's super cinematic using the game and everything, and you have different options so you can create different haikus each time, but the game doesn't let you replay a haiku after you've done it, right? So
Mhm.
basically, right, I had beaten the game. I had 100% of the game. I had gone to all the different locations, but I can't travel back to them and replay them, which is just I don't understand why they would do that. Just like let me replay it because you can choose different options, right?
Mm,
So
yeah.
I wanted to bring the game in, like have my classes create haikus together, but I can't do it, right? So a lot of the big games could be so cool to use in different ways, but they're just not built in that way. Whereas indie games, it's pretty easy, right? Especially right if they're only a couple hours, then
Mhm.
it's not a huge ask on the teacher. It's not to like play it once beforehand and then create an activity based on it.
I imagine it's also easier to distill a shorter experience down to, the message that you're trying to convey within your lesson plan or whatever the standard is, right?
Yeah. And then like in terms of genre, often like I feel like the easiest genre to step into is probably a walking simulator type like Gone Home or Edith Finch, where the like literacy around using controller is not too demanding. A student
Mhm.
who's never touched a controller could figure it out in a couple of minutes. Although the dual sticking is always really hard, like controlling the character and controlling the camera at the same time, can take a while for people to wrap their mind around. But that's always I usually tell people to try those out.
Mhm. And so, for listeners who may be less familiar, when we say a walking simulator game, it's usually in first person, and you are operating the controller. One analog stick is the X axis, and one analog stick is the Y axis. And yeah, if you're well versed in games, that comes naturally to most of us, right? But if you've never picked up a controller or never had to operate something that way, it's a small barrier, but definitely not as much as something where you're also shooting or using a sword or doing any other really involved mechanics. So some of these walking simulator games, can you tell us about like why is it called a walking simulator and what are you actually doing in those games?
I don't know the origin of the name walking sim. I assume because they're just like the gameplay is walking around, picking stuff up and reading.
Yeah.
And in Gone Home and Edith Finch, right? They're both like you're in both of them. You're just walking around the house, and then you just kind of let as you do that, you just let the narrative right come right. You're just playing. It's a set narrative. You can't really change anything. Um, but how much you get out of it depends on how much you explore around the environment.
Mm.
And they're great. And it's especially because like a lot of kids aren't playing those genres yet. They're
Mhm.
playing the fast paced stuff. So when they get a game like Gone Home or Edith Finch, and all of a sudden, like the gameplay is reading journal entries or reading like calendars and like random items that they're picking up around the house. They're like, "This looks like my house. This is where I live." There's papers all over the place, or even looking at like the rest, like just because you can, like they pick up a cereal box and you look at the recipe label and they're like, that's fun that they like actually took the time to put that there. It's a different way of getting them to like engage with literature.
It's a different cognitive lift too, because it's not a linear narrative. So
Mhm.
when we're saying it is a narrative, there is a story there, but it's something that the player actually has to piece together themselves, because they might find this note over here, and then they might find this little bit of environmental storytelling that is just,
Mhm.
a part of the house. And they might find this bit over here, and then they're actually having to piece those together, which I think is a cool way to get the mental lift of the student involved. It's just like we say with comics, where you're having to put together the pieces in between the panels, right, to string all that together. With these type of games, they're doing the same type of mental lift, but in a different way, because they're still putting all these different pieces. They're collecting all the puzzle pieces, right, and figuring out how does
Mhm.
that work with author intent. Why did the writer choose to do it this way? What is the subtext of everything that I'm not actually reading? So I'm a huge advocate and so fascinated by all the different things that this can offer. So I know that you do high school, right?
Mhm.
Um, have you ever worked with younger grades, or just strictly, or written a lesson plan for younger grades?
I personally haven't, although like a lot of the games on my website, not all of them, but a lot of them could be taught to middle schoolers. And I know a lot of like whenever I tell people like go to my website, look at my lesson plans, I also tell them like you don't need to do it exactly the way I did it. Like my handouts are there, but like change it, modify it, adapt it however you want. So you, like it can. A lot of the games have been tweaked by other teachers in a middle school or even a couple in an elementary school setting.
Oh wow. Do you know what games they used, especially for like elementary school?
So the teacher who got back to me in regards to elementary school used kind words with his students. It's a game that you do need to like moderate because it
Mm.
can deal with some heavy themes. Basically, it's an online game, and the entire premise is just like it's got like really chill music, and you just write positive letters, and you like just send them out, and then other people can read the letters and respond. And it's often used as a way of like a lot of people use it to kind of vent or talk about like what issues they're dealing with. So when I played it with my students, they're like I had them choose a concern that they're willing to share. And a lot of them explained like, "Oh, I'm struggling in this class, or I'm very nervous about going to college." And they would send these letters out um, into the unknown, and then the next day we'd look at the responses that they got from other people online, and it's always just like encouragement. So I know someone who did it with elementary school students, but they kind of parsed to make sure everything that they were seeing is perfectly fine because there are right if you play it long enough you'll see like people dealing with a lot of social emotional health things like people will talk about depression, people talk about anxieties that they have. So like in my high school setting we were able to like navigate through that, but not everyone may want to have those conversations yet with
Mhm.
super young students.
One of the things that I love on your website is that you actually have your lesson plans kind of broken down by subject, right? You have your social
Yeah,
studies. I believe you have a section completely for social emotional learning. Is that correct?
I do, yes. Because
Yeah.
so one of the and this is becoming more popular across the United States and other countries as well. But one of my classes is an advisory class where it's mostly social emotional check-ins. Sometimes it's time to catch up on homework. Sometimes it's just like how are you doing? And often I'll play these shorter games that deal with different issues and just like have us talk about it. So like I played kind words in that class, and we were just right talking about any anxieties we were having at the time. A lot of students, right? It was with my seniors, and they're like, "Well, I'm about to graduate. I don't know if I want to go to college." And they're going to college. They're nervous about leaving the city or leaving their parents since they just moved here from another country. Also, so it was just like different ways to navigate those conversations.
I know that in comics, especially when we're teaching, it's not as common now as it used to be. But there used to be a pushback to teaching with comics. There was misconceptions of, oh, this isn't real literature, or I want my kids reading real books, right? Do you ever get any of that kind of pushback in teaching with video games?
So, one of the benefits of teaching my specific community of students is that their parents are the most trusting people I've ever met. They moved here. They're sending their to a new, right to a new country. They're sending their kids to school instead of, and a lot of my kids are like they're old enough they could just go work.
Mm.
But they're sending their kids here, and pretty much anytime I've talked to the parents, they're just like, "I trust you 100%. Whatever you're doing, right? My kid, if they're learning English and they're graduating, just do whatever you need to do." So I'm lucky. I've never received pushback from any parents. The only pushback I sometimes get is from admin, but then I just explain my thought process, and then it's okay. Like 10 minutes later.
Has there ever been any pushback, or I guess what would you say if because I'm sure you've played through the hypothetical conversations in your head, right? What would you say to someone that is like, my kids have enough screen time as it is. I don't want them playing more video games. Do you have like a response that you might give to them?
Yeah, it's like, don't. What are you gonna have them do? What are you gonna and don't. What are you gonna force them to do? Because anything my parents forced me to do,
Mhm.
I ended up hating. Right? That was just a natural. Like my parent. I remember through elementary school in middle school, my parents forced me to read 50 pages a night of a
Mhm.
book, any book, and I hated it. And I don't read now. I read comics now because that's what I read for fun when I was growing up. I still read comics, I still play games, but I don't read books really unless it's like something that is really a niche interest of mine.
Mhm.
Um, so I like just don't worry about it. Really, like there's so many other things to worry about than what video games they're playing.
I think that's a nice kind of transition to looking at not maybe pushback from parents, but what do you tell teachers who want to engage? They see the power of video games, they want to be bringing it into the classroom, but maybe they don't have that experience. They don't play games and they're nervous about it. What's your advice to them to begin introducing this into their lesson plans?
The first thing would be to talk to your students because you probably have experts already there who can tell you exactly what games are connecting to the content that you're teaching. Um, and even if they haven't thought about that, right? If you give them the opportunity to think about that, they're going to.
Mhm.
If they could bring in games in any capacity to the classroom, so ask them and see what are they. Ask them what they're playing. Have them talk about what they're playing. Even if it's an online game, like get them talking about their interests because you'll come up with an idea. And if you right are still at a loss, like reach out to people online. Like Twitter has its issues. A lot of people hate Twitter, but like Twitter's remarkable for getting in contact with people. I've spoken with hundreds, potentially thousands of different teachers over the past couple of years, like about teaching and about using video games. And these are conversations that I never had before being on Twitter, right? So as long as you like curate and Twitter to what you want and just like kind of stay out of the
Mhm.
nonsense, it can't like being on some social media can be a benefit to if you're struggling to figure out what to do.
Do does gaming in the classroom have to be kind of what we've talked about, the role playing games, the kind of more involved, or is there even room for like app games, some of the, maybe lower entry level to be able to engage? Is there potential there?
There is. So one of the classes I actually did, I didn't teach it this year because I've been 100% remote this year. But back when I was in the building, I taught an elective class, and it was an English language arts elective that specifically focused on video games as literature. And
Just so cool.
yeah,
I
which
want to teach that class.
yeah, my unit plans are on the website. So, and I have full units for that class rather than like most of the stuff on Hey Listen Games is here's an activity that you can do in 2 or 3 days. And it's just like a part of what you're already doing. It's not replacing anything. It's just like fit this into what you're already doing. This class is much bigger units. But when I found we ended up finishing early one of the semesters. So I started looking just for other cool things to do. And I chose two mobile games. I chose Florence and Assemble with Care, and they are both great phone games, right? Florence is it's a puzzle game, I guess, but it's really just a visual novel. It's got beautiful music, and you're just going along for this 40-minute love story between these two characters.
We actually
And,
wrote a teaching guide for that game that wasn't published for various reasons. But Annapurna, if you're listening, I'd love to get back in touch with you. But yeah, that was a great one. It's almost like an interactive graphic novel.
yeah, and it's easy. I mean, it's a couple dollars, and you could have get multiple of them. But I actually just took my phone and got an HDMI converter and just like projected it in front of the room.
Hmm.
And I just had I had students take turns just playing it on my phone in front of everyone. So it's not like not everyone always needs to have their own copy of the game. Usually, when I'm doing this, we only have one copy and we're just playing it together. So
Well, and that's
I did that with Florence, and then for Assemble with Care, it's on Apple Arcade,
Hmm.
which you can get a month free when you start. So I just had all my students who had iPhones just get it for the first month free, broke them into groups, played it together, and then just canceled all their memberships right afterwards.
I love those little teacher hacks that we have to
Yeah.
do where it's like, I'm going to make this work.
well, that's great for accessibility too. And looking at some games are not cheap.
Right.
And options for when you want it to be accessible to students, you don't want that to be a barrier. Those opportunities for less expensive or those workarounds to make it accessible to all students is really fantastic.
Yeah, so I never expect any students to have any of this tech stuff available on their own or at home. I'd say 95% of the time we're playing together as a class projected in front of the room. Or this year I bought like I played Papers, Please like 2 weeks ago with my students, and I bought a copy for one student on Steam because he knows everything, and then he just streamed it to us, and we were just talking. I was annotating over the screen through Zoom, and we were in the chat, and everyone was talking. But we were still playing it. We were playing it all together with one copy, and that's how it's pretty much always been. If it's a free game, like on a web browser, which I've done a couple times, then it might make more sense to give them their own copy or to work in groups.
And also, if you're a teacher and you really do want all of your students to have their own copy of something, email the publisher. Go on the App
Yeah.
Store, see who published it. Because for a lot of them, if you say I'm a teacher and I would love a class set of this, they will give you either discounted or just give you download codes. And the worst they can do is just say no. So definitely, reach out to these publishers and ask and say, I'm trying to teach with your game. Is there any way that we can get some download codes for my students?
Yeah, definitely don't be afraid to reach out. A number, especially indie studios, they're much more likely to respond to you than the big AAA industry. Like they'll reach out to Nintendo or Activision, right? They're not going to
Right.
respond to you. But if you reach out to an Annapurna or a Fulbright or a Giant Sparrow, right? Those smaller indie companies will respond to you usually.
Yeah. So after this, in our live stream, we are going to be jumping into a live gameplay demo of a game that you've recommended to us. And I think we're going to be doing Emily is Away. Can you tell us a little bit about that game and what kind of the lesson plan that goes with it is aiming to teach?
Yeah. So Emily is Away is one of my favorite games out there. Or I should say series now, because there's 3 of them. But the first one, often I'll do professional development sessions for other teachers, and Emily is Away is kind of the model that I have them start with because it's a free game. You just need a computer that it can download on. It won't work on a Chromebook, but if you have a MacBook or a PC with a hard drive and you could download it, then it's free. And it's all text. There's no voice acting. It's just a 100% text game, and it's a short story told through a retro chat client like AOL Instant Messenger. And it's got all the noises and the waves of nostalgia will go over the teacher. But like the students may not know because they're a little younger, but like every single noise from the AIM days, right? It's gonna hit you in the heart as you play the
Can
game.
I craft an emo away message? Is that a possibility?
You do. you got your little bios. It's got the same sounds when someone logs on and logs off. You get your little like profile avatars based on the year
Yes.
that you're playing in the game. And it's a story, right? It's you play as a nameless character. So you can whatever. It's sort of like role playing. The character can be whatever you want the character to be, and you're talking to your friend Emily, and she will message you, and then every single time you're just provided with 3 different dialogue choices. You choose which one you want to say, and then you pretend to type away on your keyboard. Whatever you type, it will type it out on screen for you, and you send it. And that's the entire game. So it's when I teach it, I always teach it in regards of like how effective it is our dialogue choices in telling a story, because I like having students see how stories can be told in different ways. And Emily's Way is a great way to introduce people to dialogue choices, right?
Okay.
And to see how it can, because the ending of the game will change depending on what you say.
And I'm sure kind of like the tone kind of shifts depending on how you play.
100%. So like when I played the game, I was choosing everything as if it was me when I was 17. Right, I was like trying to role play my younger self, and it was like and it's just as cringy as I remember it. But it's great. And then like we were having students like decide like, is this an effective way to tell a story? Did they feel like their choices mattered and where it went and how it played out?
That is awesome. So we are going to be pulling that up right after this interview and a quick little promo for some things. We will have the lesson plan pulled up as well. We'll be playing it live. So everyone watching, you can look forward to that. Zach, I cannot thank you enough. I know you taught a whole day today and then came to talk to us. So thank you so much.
And, of course, anytime I'll come back.
Yeah, awesome. And tell us, where can people, one more time, where can people find you and where can people find your lesson plans?
Sure. So I'm pretty active on Twitter. I'm at HeyListenGames _. Don't forget the underscore at the end. If you just the regular at HeyListenGames is some inactive account that I'm trying to get but haven't succeeded in getting yet.
And I will second that Zach is a great Twitter follow. So if you're an educator out there, make sure you go follow him.
Thank you. Yeah, and that's an easy way to get in touch with me. Like if you send me, my DMs are open there. So if you send me a message on Twitter, I'm likely to respond to it. And my website is heylistengames.org. All my lesson plans are there. They're all free. There are, like, you could donate. There are people who donate or support me on a Patreon page that I have, but like that's, teachers don't make money, so please, like if you don't have the means, just take them and just tell people about it. But there is a contact form on Hey Listen Games that you could fill out. It'll shoot me an email, which I'm also very likely to respond to.
Can confirm that works. That's how we got you on the show.
Yes.
Well, Zach, thanks again. And we will hop back over to our